Welcome. Today's road trip has brought us almost to the top of Hastings County. Actually, Hastings County is a very large one. We are here about 112 kilometers from the Bay of Quinte. In fact, Hastings County is the second largest county in Ontario. In fact, this county is larger than 28 countries in the world. And in fact, you could fit 19 of those countries right into the boundaries of Hastings County. As you drive across Hastings County from the south to the north, you'll notice so many changes in the lay of the land. From the south, you have the rolling farmlands. As you come to central Hastings County, you have the beginnings of the Canadian Shield and of course, the old iron mining country of years gone by. And when you arrive here in the far north of Hastings County, this is lumbering country. The early settlement of this area in the 1850s was made possible because the province built what they called colonization roads. These were roads running north and south and east and west in the hope of bringing settlers into this area. The government offered free land grants of 100 acres to people who would come here. Many at that time were Irish who had escaped the Great Irish Famine in the late 1840s, and they were very much attracted to the possibility of free land and, of course, having their own farms. However, when they did get here, very often they were found the land was rocky, the soil was not very good. However, they were able to take up employment, particularly in the winter, in the lumbering industry, because the trees were cut during the winter, were drawn by horses to the rivers, the York River, the Mattawa River, and there they were put out on the ice, and of course in the spring they would rush down to mainly to the Ottawa area. So the farmers who came here could make a moderate living in the winter in the forest, and then in the summer on their farms. The settlement, of course, grew in the later 1800s at a moderate rate with the combination of the farming, the lumbering, and some mining. And all of this led to a very stable and a very steady growth in the Bancroft area. This settlement was, of course, called York River for many years, but in 1879, Bill of Flint, who was the local lumber baron and the developer of a lot of the areas of Hastings County, he proposed to the provincial government that the name be changed. He wanted to honor his wife, Phoebe, whose maiden name was Bancroft. At the turn of the century, in 1900, there was an important development here with the arrival of the railroad. And you could imagine that helped the people coming in to this area and, of course, the movement of goods in and out of the Bancroft area. In 1904, the settlement was incorporated as a village, which gave it a structure and council. And then in 1905, a very important thing in 1905, the first telephone arrived in Bancroft, and it was installed right here in the train station. In more recent years, Bancroft had quite a boom with the discovery of uranium. There were several uranium mines here, and they operated and provided a great deal of employment. At that time, uranium was in very high demand all around the world. In addition, some other minerals were mined here. In fact, 70% of all minerals that can be found in Canada can be found right here in the Bancroft area. There are so many stories about the early days here, the lumbering days, the lumberjacks, and life in the early days. And we're so pleased to have with us today a local historian, Mary Kavanagh, who is going to tell us some of those stories about the early days right here in Bancroft.
Bancroft is here because of the river that runs through it. It's at the north end of Hastings County, as Richard has pointed out. And the reason that we have Bancroft at all is because there is a falls on the river, and that falls allowed us to generate power back in the day when the settlers first came here. The river itself is a transportation loop that it's on the Ottawa system, so the water goes all the way to Ottawa. Lumbering was huge in the day. So in fact, they cut timber in all the areas surrounding this river, and they put the logs into the river and they ran them south. Now in the very early days, some of the more colorful stories obviously center around the rowdiness of the lumbermen who would in fact be riding the logs down through. The people who settled in the town and wanted grist mills and sawmills and woolen mills on the river on the falls would frequently have those knocked out. Any bridges across the river were frequently knocked out by the logs running down the river a couple of times a year, usually in the spring when the water was high. In the winter they would fill the lakes with the logs, then they would blow up the dam that they'd created and the logs would run rampant right through the town. So there was always a bit of angst between the lumber people and the people who wanted to settle permanently in the town. The town itself centered around Bridge Street, which is still a very active part of town and has many of the historical buildings on it. The building behind us, which is the train station, was rebuilt, but the original building was built in 1900 when the railway connected to Bancroft from the south. It wasn't until 1907 that this railway actually connected 7 or 8 miles north of here with a railway that ran east and west from Ottawa, Irondale, and on over to the Lindsay area. So at that point in time, industry developed more fully because if you will notice, there are not that many brick buildings in town, and that's an historical throwback. Until the railway was here in Bancroft, there was no way to transport brick into this area. So the older buildings, if you see older buildings in town that have brick on them, they were built after 1900. With the railway, they were able to ship lumber instead of running it down the river. They were able to ship marble. There were huge marble quarries here, and if you have ever gone to the Parliament buildings in Ottawa, in Toronto, Casa Loma in Toronto, the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto, marble from there is from this town of Bancroft and was shipped out basically on the railway. One of the things I say to the children when they come to visit the museum is, if you go on your class trips to the Parliament buildings, when you touch the marble columns, you are touching a piece of Bancroft. Bancroft is the mineral capital of Canada. That is the name that we have garnered over the years, and it's legitimately attached to the town of Bancroft through the federal government.
When you come on your road trip to North Hastings, there's so much to see. On the way here, you travel through beautiful countryside, and of course in North Hastings you have the rocks and the forests and the swamps. It's so very different from the south. But here in the town of Bancroft itself, there's a lot to see. This is a very busy, a very active town, and there's so many activities. I'm going to ask Mary once again, would you tell us what can a person coming to Bancroft on this road trip see and do in the town?
Bancroft today is amazing. It's the intersection of two major highways that run across the province. One is 28, which runs east and west, and the other is 62, which runs north and south. Because of that intersection, huge numbers of people visit us every year. As a matter of fact, we've calculated about 5 million people go through the heart of the town of Bancroft every year.
As we have been traveling around Hastings County and making these films about the various villages and settlements, we've come to know the county as we never knew it before. There is so much to see, so much to enjoy. So we encourage you, get out on a road trip, stop in the villages, walk around, read the historic plaques, get to know our county, and I'm sure you'll be very pleasantly surprised.